and welcome to Arts and Entertainment. I'm Deborah Gilbert, your host. So glad that you could spend part of your day with me today. Well, we have a special show for you. We're going to talk about poetry. And my guest today is Pat O'Brien, the Poet Laureate for the town of Old Saybrook, Connecticut. And Pat, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Such a pleasure. I'm glad you're taking time out to be with us today. Why don't we start with you? Why don't you tell us about your background? Tell us about you.
Well, that I stumbled onto poetry is somehow even a mystery to me, because my background, I was as an undergraduate, I studied home economics. I feel better about that as I realize historically it was Eleanor Roosevelt who pushed home economics, so it doesn't feel like such a humble start to my academic career. But anyway, from there, I had a little hitch in my life, in as much as I gave birth to a son that I surrendered to adoption. So, and then went back to New York City to work for the city of New York as a welfare worker. And it was there that I met my current husband, John. And we married, had 2 sons, and in 1980, when my son would have been 20, I found him. So we've been in reunion ever since. He's now going to be 60 pretty soon. So we've had a wonderful long reunion, and our family is very rich with adoptees and stepchildren and step-parents and half-brothers and half-sisters. So it's been a good life. But anyway, during that time I also got an opportunity through the city of New York. This is when people believed in these kinds of things. I was able to get a scholarship to go to a graduate school of my choice. And so I chose Columbia, and I was on what they called paid educational leave, which meant that they not only paid your tuition, but I stayed on the payroll. So I went to school full-time and remained an employee of the city. And the obligation had been to go back to work at the end of the time, and we had a bit of a conflict because my husband was getting transferred out of the state. And the city said, no, don't worry, we're changing our philosophy here. We're just going to be an income maintenance agency. We don't need you. So off I went, but I had that wonderful degree to my name, which has been a real help along the way.
I was reading, my mother was kind enough to loan me When Less Than Perfect Is Enough by you, that you have a very rich history with regards not only to poetry, but to prisons, et cetera, et cetera. Tell me more about, as your life progressed and you moved, what happened?
So somewhere along the way, I can't tell you now exactly how many years ago, but I became interested in Buddhism. I think it was one of these continuing ed programs when we were living in Illinois, and some of the teachings just really resonated with me. So that I've carried along with me when we returned to Connecticut, and I joined a meditation center in New Haven, and it was women and men there who established a hospice program with a local visiting nurse agency. And we went in and worked with the prisoners. We went to 2 of the men's prisons and to York, which was a women's prison, and helped to establish hospice program in the prison, in which the prisoners themselves became hospice volunteers. So it was a really wonderful opportunity for, I think, for them as well as for me. When we were finishing up at the women's prison, I thought to myself, I don't want to leave. So maybe we could start a writing program, and I could kind of use my connections to get friends of mine to come in and to speak and to help create some writing classes and kind of things. So it was a wonderful opportunity. We all had a grand time. Yeah.
Has poetry been a part of your life for forever?
I've been asked that, and I think the image, I said my life is like a series of slides in a carousel, you know, and every once in a while, the image of myself on a train coming back from somewhere, and it was like a broken heart relationship, somebody leaving, and I just wrote down quickly what I was thinking, and when I got done, I said, oh, I think that might be a poem. And so that was my start. It was very humble. And of course, I do not have an academic background in poetry. I've managed to pick up courses at Housatonic Community College and at Bridgeport University. Those, you know, I've picked up as an adult courses along the way, but I'm not steeped in it, which I envy. I wish that I had had two lives, and one of them was in pursuit of academics, but not to be.
Well, your poetry endeavors have led to books. You have the two behind you, one of which is a repeat that I have in my hand.
Right.
How did your poetry life transcend into book form?
Well, I have, through my interest in poetry, I've joined several groups. One is the Guilford Poets Guild, which was a long-established one. I was very lucky I got in, even though I was from old Saybrook. So I've been with them for probably 15 years. And then about 3 or 4 years ago, I met up with a poet who also had just won a prize at the Acton Library. And I said, gee, we should be like doing something. There's got to be poets around. So P.S., we co-founded Connecticut River Poets, and there's 12 of us. I'm proud to say we've had Poets Laureate in our group. Marilyn Nelson has been there, and Margaret Gibson, who's our current Poet Laureate for the state of Connecticut. But anyway, it was, I've forgotten what your question is.
Well, being that your poetry path has led to book form, how did you be able to move to the print?
So I think, you know, it was kind of by osmosis. I see other people getting books together, and I said, oh, what a fine idea. And a lot of us had worked with Rennie McQuilkin, who was Antrim Books is his company, and so that book is through Antrim Books. And now I'm working on another book of poetry, so I'm deciding how to go now from there.
I know the viewer, because I introduced you as the Poet Laureate for the town of Old Saybrook, yes, Connecticut. I know the viewer will want to know, what does that mean and how did it happen?
Okay, so the town had decided, by the way, there are something close to 20 Poets Laureate in the state of Connecticut. So towns make the decision, gee, that seems like a really nice idea, let's promote poetry in our community, and they make the decision to invite somebody to become Poet Laureate. And you have to meet certain standards, you have to be in serious pursuit of poetry or have an interest in it, and a willingness to spend some time promoting poetry, getting out the word, encouraging poetry to be read and to be written. So,
what does Poet Laureate mean? I know it's a title.
Yeah, I had to look this up before I got
I also did too, just to be able to know how to spell it.
Yeah, so it goes back to the ancient Greece, and it was an understanding, an appreciation of poetry and the importance of it, and kind of establishing a mindset for the community. So a poet laureate would primarily be interested in writing poetry on occasions, important occasions, for instance, perhaps the birth of royalty or something of that nature. And so it's carried on all that time. And a laurel wreath is the kind of a symbol of the poet laureate, and I have mine. And Nathan, I am sorry that I didn't bring it today, but
although
anyway,
you
I have
showed
a
it
beautiful, a beautiful, yeah. So anyway, so what I've been doing, which was working quite well until the pandemic, and that is kind of spreading poetry all over town. So I have it in local bakeries, coffee shops, grocery stores, that kind of thing, to get people's poetry up and posted. I've used themes. I've asked my sister and fellow poets to come up with poems that address a certain theme, and then we post them. So we've had them in Town Hall. We've had them at Ashland Coffee, Pursuit of Pastry. We have them at Food Works. And did I say the library? Acton Library. So, oh, and then the parks. I went to Park and Recreation and said, you have these wonderful stands that tell you, you know, what fish are biting or how to treat your trees. How about some poetry? And so we have poetry up in those display cases.
Has the pandemic affected you and your pursuit of getting poetry out to the public?
I think so. For instance, at Mercina's restaurant, I put together, we at Connecticut River Poets did a book, which was poetry and art along the Connecticut River. And it's really beautiful. So I took pages from that, laminated them, put them in a little box, and they could be left on the tables of the people that were eating, and they could pick up look at the artwork and flip it over and read the poem. Well, now we can't have that kind of stuff. People are having to sanitize everything, and so those kinds of efforts have been pulled back. And then like at Ashland, we've had a bulletin board there. I've also posted notebooks and invited people to respond to the poetry that they see there, and also to write poems of their own, which has been great fun, and they've done some wonderful things. And when one kind of strikes home, I'll make sure I'll print that up and post it along with all the other poems.
Let's take a moment. We're going to take a break. We'll be right back.
Really? Buzz, what's up, man? You left some leaves burning out here.
Yeah, I just came in just for a second.
Come on, man. If it's too hot to touch, it's too hot to leave. You could torch the whole neighborhood.
It's a good point there, Smokey.
9 out of 10 wildfires are caused by humans.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
And welcome back to Arts and Entertainment. I'm Deborah Gilbert, your host. We continue on with Pat O'Brien, the Poet Laureate for the town of Old Saybrook. And Pat, thanks so much for being here and continuing to stay.
Thank you again.
You know what? I know the viewer would like to hear some of your work, and you have selected a poem for us to hear.
have.
Would you like to read it?
Sure, I would love to.
Please, go ahead.
Thank you. And just so you know, this poem is included in the Laureates of Connecticut. It's an anthology of contemporary poetry, and it is by the Poets Laureate of Connecticut, or at least at that time. I think it's now a couple of years old. Time
moves along.
Oh my goodness. So anyway, as I mentioned earlier, there was this time in my life that things were turned upside down because I had surrendered my son for adoption. And this poem was written looking back on that moment and wondering how I kept going. Mm-hmm. I had come back from New York City, where my son was born, and was living with my parents. They lived in a small apartment. What had been my brother's room was converted back into my room. So this is a poem about that moment. It's called Getting Up. And I wrote it in second person. She is second person, right? Rather than first person, because I think for me, there's times that I can gain clarity by creating some distance from the story. So I experimented with this and ended up using she rather than I.
Okay.
Getting up. She's nudged awake by the sun's first light across the bed in which she had never thought she could, but somehow slept. Then the grief and sleep she forgot comes back. She is in what was once her brother's bed in his old room. She is, after all, an intrusion on life's predictability, and had to come back home, her parents' welcome muddled by their ache for the baby boy they said she had to leave behind. From down the hall, their kitchen talk weaves the noise of the whisk against the stainless steel bowl, the startled hiss of the frying pan, coffee rattling the glass dome. And despite no reason to think she can, she heads to her place at the table to start the day again.
Quite moving. Was it moving for you to read and to write it, let alone read it?
Well, again, this is the power of poetry that has enabled me in this instance to revisit a time that was so mysterious to me, and to look back and say, yes, it was all of that, and still you got up. Still there was something about the familiarity of your parents' voices, the noise of the kitchen, saying, okay, let's try this again.
And I know the viewer is probably very interested, because I know there are individuals out there that would like to, children, men and women, seniors, that would love to be able to pursue being a poet themselves.
Yes.
How does somebody begin to pursue their own journey of poetry?
That's really interesting. I'm wondering if it's a pursuit. I wonder if it doesn't just kind of land on you, in as much as if life is handing you either some tremendous joy or some tremendous challenge, and you find yourself kind of searching, how am I going to deal with this? How am I going to manage this? Or this is so wonderful, I can't contain myself. That's a really good time to pick up a pen or a pencil, or pick up your computer, which is my favorite way to work now, or the phone, and write. And see what comes of it. One of my favorite definitions of poetry is the best words in the best order. So it's not asking anybody to be fancy. You don't have to be a poet to be able to write what is touching you, what's affecting you, what questions you have about this mortal coil. So anybody can do it. I strongly encourage, just carry a pencil with you and stay open to the world and what's going on in your mind and your heart. There's poetry there.
Then the next step would be if somebody has things in writing,
Yes.
how on earth does somebody get published?
Okay, so maybe I can't answer the publishing part so much, except, of course, if you send something to your local paper or your magazines or whatever you like to. NPR, I just sent a poem about bus drivers because I heard the most wonderful interview there about New York City bus drivers as first responders or first. So anyway, currently, and I'm just resuscitating this because I kind of forgot that I had even started it. I have on Facebook a page called Poetry, Readers and Writers in Old Saybrook. And if you go onto Facebook and look it up, we welcome any remarks you have about the poetry that's up there and post poems of your own, and we'll get a conversation going.
Now, you're the Poet Laureate of Old Saybrook. Is there a Poet Laureate for each town, or you're saying there's 20 for the state?
There's 20 for the whole state, somewhere in that vicinity, anyway. We have one in Clinton, we have one in Guilford, so local, Middletown, we have one. I have the list here. I'm sorry, I don't know them all.
Oh, no, that's okay.
Yeah.
Now, for 2016, I believe you said that you became the Poet Laureate
Yes.
for life. What does that mean?
I just became Poet Laureate for life in December of 2019.
Oh, 19.
19, because my original was, it's for like 3 years or something, so mine was coming up. And I think they actually sent out applications for other poet laureates to apply, and nobody did, so here I am.
So here you are. What does that mean for you and the town of Old Saybrook in the future? Do you do things with them in conjunction of poetry?
I mean, one of the things that I've done in addition to putting up these displays and, putting up the notebooks, encouraging people to write there, I have also did a couple of workshops at the estuary. But again, this is a time that things are shut down, so I haven't been doing that, but it's something, especially with all this time, to think about our lives and what we're doing with them. I think I would like to go back and offer to do that again, the senior center, and also at Acton Library. And I know the director there would like to see that happen. So those are things that I'm hoping can happen.
Do you actively get out there and teach poetry to other individuals in seminars or one-on-one?
Teaching, I probably not so much teaching, but I've provided workshops which really kind of encourage people, whoever participates, to come in and, for instance, at the estuary, and I learned this from Margaret Gibson as a way of providing a prompt, is I just went through my house and collected odds and ends, old baking soda boxes and stuff like that, knickknacks, and put them out on the table and asked the participants, there were probably 10 of us maybe altogether, to pick one of them and whatever inspired them in that item to write about it. So that was, I think, was really a fun project. Another thing that I've done, and I have done workshops with this because I was able to be in a workshop that used it, and it's called I Remember. And what it encourages the participants to do is to write just brief lines, and every line is separated by a space. I remember. I remember running down the street and the dog got under my feet and I fell on my face. Another space. I remember my parents whizzing me to the hospital, or whatever it is, so that you end up creating actually a very interesting poem, a series of poems with that very perky I remember. So.
Well, just to say thank you very much. We have run out of time. It's been wonderful having you, and thank you for sharing all of this wonderfulness about poetry and your journey. It's been wonderful.
Well, and you've been wonderful to me, so thank you very much.
You're welcome. I'm Deborah Gilbert. You've been tuned into Arts and Entertainment. I want to thank you so much for spending your day with us. See you next time.